Welcome to the impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. We're back this week with one of the few times we've had a returning guest, but we're very excited to have him on the show and to bring a totally new perspective to you guys. He was our first guest for the video platform on YouTube back on episode 31. If you guys have not heard his story of battling cancer and going on to competing in powerlifting and becoming a professional powerlifter at one of the very highest levels, competing in some of the highest comps you can, you guys definitely need to check out his story back on episode number 31, as we said. But we're excited to have him back today to talk about. We're going to dive into a lot of different things, but one of the main things we're going to dive into is how do you juggle the priorities in your life? How do you establish priorities and then follow those and use those to execute a daily routine that allows you to compete at the highest level in whatever it is that you're chasing, whether that's sports or athletics or whether that's something totally different like business or family life, whatever that may be. We're going to talk about how you can develop some strategies to establish a good routine in your life to allow you to perform at those levels, and also how you can deal with some of the mental frustrations that can come with, having to navigate those waters, so many important things in your life, and how do you figure out where these priorities lie and what time you want to put into each of them. So with that, we're very excited to have back on Tim Kashorek. Thanks for coming on it again today, sir.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, anytime.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off with chatting about, we know originally you were going to have a big competition in April here, and then unfortunately, the flu came along and kind of changed that plan a little bit. Yeah. But where are you now? So like a year ago, you were prepping for the Arnold Classic, and then you went on to complete the Arnold Classic and performed amazingly there. I know you've had two meets since the Arnold Classic as well, one of them being the American Pro, which is one of the biggest powerlifting events in the world. So how's the last year looked for you in powerlifting and strength, and what are your goals going forward now?
Well, one of the biggest differences is right after the Arnold Classic, I ended up switching up my training style a little bit, and I ended up hiring a new coach. Not that I had any problems with my previous coach, but I felt like for me physically, I was having some issues with the training sustainably. I felt like my body wasn't necessarily holding up the best to that training style, which was a lot of very intense, very heavy, big three lift focused. It was primarily squat, bench, and deadlift, minimal accessories, and it was just hammering those three lifts very, very heavy. Mm-hmm. So I felt like I was hurting all the time and not really recovering as much, and I had kind of reached about the most potential that I would with that training style, I felt, and it was time to try to find something a little bit different. So right after the Arnold Classic, which was the beginning of March last year, just over a year ago now, I ended up switching over to a new coach, Philip Herndon, who, if any of you guys are familiar in the powerlifting world, is pretty elite as far as they go.
Yeah, if you guys haven't heard of Phil Herndon, go look him up right now on Instagram or YouTube, and you're going to see some absolutely. What did he just do at the Arnold?
Yeah, he just competed at the Arnold this year, and I want to say he had a 23, almost 2,400 total, and that's raw, and that's with a walked out squat, competing out of a combo rack.
That's wild.
He
squatted
over
9, right?
920 something in
wild.
Sleeves.
And I remember seeing it. It moved pretty quick,
yeah,
faster than
easy.
900 pounds has any business.
It was an all-time
moving.
world record in the weight class.
Was it 275?
Yeah, 275 class. I believe he has pretty much all the different world records and all the different squat disciplines for that weight class. He has a handful in the 242s as well.
Cool. So you got a coach that he's competing at the highest level. He's got loads of experience, but also it sounds like he's pretty in line with like what your goals are personally in competition. Like you're a 275 guy now as well. Yes. And so like he knows what it is to compete in that weight class. He's got experience in that weight class, and he has a style pretty similar to yours as well, right? Like how he performs the lifts.
Not necessarily. His the whole reason I ended up going with him is because he's a squat specialist, basically. I mean, that's not to say his bench and his deadlift aren't awesome as well. You have to put those kind of totals up, but I squat high bar with a closer stance, and he has a much better squat stance. Is wider, and he can compete high bar and low bar, or squat high bar and low bar, but I think he treats high bar more as an accessory lift, and he competes low bar.
Okay. Now, for like people who are listening who don't know anything about that, and honestly, like I've been powerlifting a long time, and I don't feel like I fully understand the nuance. Like, what is the difference between high bar and low bar as far as the movement goes, and like what does each give you?
So the low bar squat refers to where on your back the bar is placed. Okay. So the low bar, it can be in various heights depending on how extreme you want to go, but typically you'll rest the bar on your rear delts. When you flex your back, it almost forms a shelf for the bar to sit on, and it affects your leverages as to where you're going to hinge, how much weight is, or how the weight is distributed. So with the low bar squat, typically you're a little bit more upright and it's not as much strain on your back. With a high bar squat, the bar is sitting up on your traps, and it's a lot more stress on your lower back as far as the amount of weight there. You have to have a strong back and glutes, otherwise it'll just fold you forward with a high bar squat. That's not to say you can't be strong doing that. Look at John Hack, the strongest power lifter in existence, arguably, or at least raw anyway.
The thing that blows my mind about John Hack's squat is his shoulder mobility. Like, to me, that's like one of the most, like, he can, because I cannot do this at all, but he can get his hands like so close to his shoulders when he's still squatting like 800 or 900 pounds and just like keep total control over it. Like, I don't understand that at all. That's wild.
You see how big his traps are.
Yeah.
It's sitting up on his traps, which helps the
whole
angle
shelf
of being able to put it back. But I don't bend quite that well.
Me either, man. It's wild. But so, like, what is the advantage to, or is there any advantage to a high bar squat then?
I wouldn't necessarily, it's an advantage. I actually kind of look at it as a disadvantage.
Okay.
But it all comes down to the individual person and what they're capable of. And I understand that a low bar squat would be ideal. And actually, the meet that I did I believe it was last July, it was in Indianapolis. It was a WRPF meet. Well, they were still around. I actually did a prep low bar, and I competed one time low bar, and I did hit a 5-pound squat PR that meet. I squatted 705 that meet, but it was not comfortable for me at all. And ideally, you would have a little bit of a wider stance if you're going to be squatting low bar, and I don't have the hip mobility or the strength to really maintain that wider squat stance. So I kept my narrow high bar squat, but I just moved the bar down on my back a little bit. So it wasn't perfect by any means, and I ended up causing more elbow and shoulder issues than it was worth. So my bench ended up suffering, even though my squat did okay. And then the squat was a lot uglier. So even though it was technically a 5-pound PR, it was the very most I could have done. I don't think I could have put one more pound on that bar and gotten it. Where at the Arnold last year, I squatted 700 with the high bar, and my third attempt 700, I probably could have added 20 pounds to it and still gotten it.
Yeah, it flew. I remember that lift. I was just like blown away by that thing. And so you're a very like quad dominant squatter then?
Yes, very quad dominant.
So I am like completely the total opposite, almost kind of by default. With the one leg situation, but I am very posterior chain dominant. I can use my like left quad, obviously. I can very minimally use my right quad. The leverages get really weird with how my legs moves in the prosthetic. But so I have a very wide stance. My arms tend to be more wide out, and I'm definitely like as low as I can get that bar on my back without it rolling down my back.
Yeah.
That's definitely how I like to do it. And I've noticed that too. Like if I'm using a bar that sits up really high, like even for me, the safety squat bar does this, because I think just because of that pad and everything, and then like how you can, if you adjust the handles wherever they are, it can change like where the weight's positioned. I struggle with the safety squat bar.
The safety squat bar automatically redistributes a lot of the weight to the quads.
Okay.
A lot of people will use that bar as a quad accessory.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even realize that, but I have always struggled on that bar. Like I've never done well, but that makes sense because I am I am not a quad squatter, but that's an area I've actually been trying to work on recently, because the way I look at it is like, if I can just, I'm not used to training my quads, but if I can just train them at least in like accessories and stuff like that, and get some work in them on the like leg press and do some quad work with the belt squat, then if I can strengthen that weakest area a little bit, hopefully it can translate over to my competition squat some. But that bar has never worked for me. But what I found that I do love is the Mars bar, which I think a lot of people look at the Mars bar and they say, oh, that's no different than a safety squat bar. But to me, it is like complete and total opposite.
The leverage from where the bar is on your back, it gives you that low bar effect. It puts it in roughly the same place, maybe even a little bit lower.
Well, to me, I was paying attention to it when I was up squatting with it at the Arnold this year, and it was putting it like almost at the bottom of my shoulder blades. It was in a bar position that I could not hold on a straight bar. There would be no way I could hold
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And there are some people that can do that.
Yeah.
But they're typically not people in the 275 plus class.
I am not a people who can do that. I'm not in that class right now, shoulder mobility wise. But yeah, for me, it was like, that changed. I didn't even realize it till I got heavy on it, and I went back and watched the videos. My depth, I did like 407 for 4, and my depth on it was so much better than it's ever been on any other bar. And I think it was because I could move the weight so low. The other thing it does that I wasn't fully expecting is because it sits the weight very low at the bottom of your shoulder blades, and then the arms kind of come up and over. They actually lock in just below your front delts. And so because of how mechanics work, with the pressure being that low on your back, it actually like forces your upper back into like a really good position. So it forced me to keep my upper back like really straight and really locked in. And I noticed that helped me with having a lot of power out of the hole as well. So that's been a great bar for me. I'm going to try to work to overload on that some. We're actually going to use it as the one of the main bars in the Parameet this summer as well, because pretty much anybody, I think it's going to be a better bar for pretty much any adaptive athlete. Like obviously if you're like Jeff and you don't have arms, it's going to be a great bar for you, because it'll just sit and lock in on your shoulders. It can't fall or go anywhere. But even for people who have like cerebral palsy or MS or ataxia that struggle with like keeping fluid movements and they're very jerky and they're always jostling around, I think it's going to stay on their back a lot better than a traditional straight bar would.
So is that going to be universal across the para division, or are there certain qualifications to get to use it?
It'll be for the para division specifically, but not everybody has to use that bar. We're really trying to keep it because nothing like this has ever really been done before. It's technically sanctioned by the USPC, but it's like its own total division. So like they've actually got the ability to put it on open powerlifting now, but it wouldn't count. Like if by some chance somebody came out and squatted an all-time world record, it wouldn't technically count as an all-time world record.
Which it makes sense, because like you said, it can be an advantage because it can put the bar in a naturally low position, which is going to help your leverages.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why we kind of took it totally out of that world. And we really just wanted to make this an event where any adaptive athlete, now you have to meet the world para powerlifting specifications or qualifications to be in that division. You can't have arthritis and be that division. You can't have a broken arm and be in that division.
So give me some examples.
Yeah. So like cerebral palsy counts, amputation counts, dwarfism counts, ataxia, which is basically any form of like generalized movement disorder. Ataxia is what Arlen has.
Okay.
And so there's these specific medical diagnoses that qualify for the para division. But there's certain ones that don't. Like I said, we've had people with arthritis try to get in. And the reason we're so strict about like really keeping that divide is because we're trying to build this division for adaptive athletes that have the specific diagnosed medical conditions the World Powerlifting has deemed. Yes, this is I hate this word, but they say this is a medical disability that will severely limit your ability to compete at the highest level as opposed to somebody who does not have this specific diagnosis. And so we want to open it up to them because there's a lot of people who do adaptive lifting but never compete because they just feel like there's no competition available to them. There's most powerlifting feds actually won't let people compete if they need any sort of adaptation whatsoever. So like Jeff, he's a great example. He would never be able to compete, never even be allowed to compete just because he needs a harness or he needs a specific, like Jeff could never hold a straight bar on his back. Like there's just no two ways about it when you don't have any arms at all whatsoever. But even people who are missing, like we've got some people who are missing just below the elbow and they can squat, but they have to like tie a strap around the other side and put their little nub through it, and to them, honestly, that's not even like a competitive advantage. It just allows them to hold on to the bar.
It would make it harder.
It would be harder. Yeah. So, but there's a lot of feds that won't even let them do that. USPC is the first federation to actually like want to establish this and open this up to lifters. And it's had a really great response from both adaptive lifters and people in just the general public as well. And so we're really trying to work. We've got those categories really clearly and strictly defined. And we want to keep that pretty strict in relation to World Powerlifting. But outside of that, we're allowing the lifter to adapt the meet to their needs. So we don't want to give anybody a distinct competitive advantage, but we want to allow them to have what they need to be able to compete at their highest level. So Jeff's a great example. He'll be using the Mars bar to squat and he'll be using the squat harness to deadlift. And that allows him to go out and compete at the best level he can. Now, that doesn't mean every lifter has to use the Mars bar and every lifter has to use the squat harness because not every lifter has the same needs that Jeff does, and this is where it gets really tough. But honestly, I think it's really fun because we've taken out a lot of this like perfect uniformity in powerlifting. Because sometimes I feel like powerlifting has gotten a little too far in the direction that we've got so many weight classes, so many age divisions. Like then we've got tested and we've got untested and we've got raw and wraps and geared. It's just seems to the point now where it's like there's so many divisions that like something like a world record is even hard to understand. Like, well, what type of world record, you know, because some are a little more intense than others, because there's just so many different divisions now. And so now we've kind of stripped a lot of that back and we've let lifters just like come out and compete at your very best level. And yeah, it's not going to be perfectly equitable. It's not going to be perfectly equal, but the lifters, honestly, like we don't tend to care about that. Like so many of these lifters have been denied for years. That's how Jeff was. He tried to get into any meet he could, and he was just denied one after the other. And eventually USPC opened a window for him. So most of these lifters are just ecstatic about the opportunity to come out and compete despite having every reason to not be able to. So we're hoping to empower them to be able to do that at their personal highest level.
I feel like it brings it back to what powerlifting is for 99% of people. Of course, there's the 1% that are the ones who are the very elite of the elite, who every time they compete, they are going after a world record, if not multiple. And everybody else, they need to have other goals. And I feel like what it should be about is being better than your previous self.
Yeah.
And so this allows those people to get back to that.
That's 100% the best way to put it. And we love it because it gives them that meet experience. Like, I mean, anybody who's ever done a meet, that like performing in a meet is a totally different experience than like going in and maxing out in the gym. Mm-hmm. Like, it is a whole day that brings like ups and downs, highs and lows. Like you can't even describe with words. Like I get ecstatic just like thinking about it. I start like shaking. I have so much fun with it. But anybody who's ever competed before knows that it's a totally different experience. And so we want to bring this to those athletes because there's so many athletes out there who have lifted for years and years and years. Or maybe we've even got some who've never really lifted before, but they want to get into it and they want to try it out. There's all these adaptive opportunities for like runners, and even adaptive triathlon is huge, and even adaptive strongman is like fairly large, but there's never been a truly established, solidified adaptive para powerlifting division before.
Yeah.
Some feds have played around with it, but again, they try to make it too uniform in a world that has no uniformity.
That's kind of the definition of the entire thing.
That's the whole thing about para is like
exactly
it is not uniform at all. And so
each person automatically has unique needs.
Exactly. And so we're trying to create like a level of a playing field as possible. And we still have the same weight divisions. We've got male versus female. We don't even have it's totally untested right now. We may someday open a tested option if the desire is there. But again, like most of these athletes, like we're just looking to come out and compete at our highest level. And like you say, be better than your previous self.
Exactly.
And I think you're right. I think that's kind of been lost in powerlifting because we're not all going to be a John Hack. We're not all going to be a Phil Herndon. We're not all going to be like competing at the highest level. Now, it's great for the people who can, chase those records and even in the pro division stuff. But like myself, I'm never going to be looking at a 500 dots, or at least that's not a goal of mine right now. And I don't know that I would even have the capability if I wanted to. But we can all go out and build a level of strength we never dreamed we'd be capable of.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be looking at a 500 dots to enjoy it. Yeah. And don't look at 500 dots, look at what your last dots was and add a few points to it.
Yeah. Or can you break through and like, can you get to 400 pounds on your squat, or can you get to 500 or, there's all
set
these
your own milestones.
Yeah.
There's nothing saying what you have to accomplish or what you have to strive for. It's a sport where you set all the parameters, even down to you pick your own attempts in a meet based on what you think you can and want to accomplish.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about it is because there's such a complete art to powerlifting, and I don't see it there's so many other sports I don't see it in, like in like marathons, for example. I loved it. Well, I don't love to, but I enjoy what we build from going out and running marathons and what we get to do in effect. And there is a certain part of endurance, the endurance running mentality that I do like, but man, it is tough. I'm not built for it, but
I feel you there.
But marathons are different because everybody can chase their own time goal and they kind of have that respect, but not everybody can just go out and compete, or that you don't get to go out and like design your own competition day like you can in powerlifting.
There's a lot of strategy to the sport that people don't necessarily understand if you don't compete in the sport. And even similar sports, while there's strategy to any sport, is not quite at the same level. Like even looking at strongman, strongman, you're not picking anything.
Yep.
You lift exactly what they tell you to lift and how they tell you to do it. And powerlifting is probably one of the only sports where you get to pick every single aspect of it, and either you get it or you don't, because the standards are what are maintained as the same.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about it is you design your own game and then you go out and compete in it, and that's so cool for me because that adds a massive mentality piece to the game. Like, can you miss a second attempt and turn around and hit it the third time, because you have to try that same weight again. So, sometimes you miss a second attempt because it's just like you make a stupid mistake or something like that. But sometimes, like in December for me, I went for 304 second attempt and I missed it just not for any really good reason, honestly, than just like I did not have the strength on that second attempt. And then I like find a way to get myself in a position mentally and physically, make a few little physical adjustments that allow me to come back and hit a really good rep on third attempt. So it's like that to me, that's such a huge mental piece, because at least I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. Cause I know for me it's huge, but like the mental, I don't know if like anxiety or even like, honestly, I feel like fear sometimes going after some of these like max effort weights. Like, and I think that your body has that reaction sometimes, especially on certain lifts that maybe you're not built for. But do you ever battle that like this like anxiety or this like fear, kind of the weight that you have to overcome?
It depends on how I've prepared for it and how I'm feeling. So if I feel like I've had a really good prep, or if I feel like I am in the shape or condition I need to, then it's not intimidating to me. But if I feel like there's an unknown element, or if I am battling some kind of injury that will affect the lift, then absolutely there's an anxiety, a fear there going into it, trying to handle a weight that I don't know if I can do or not. That was a huge thing going into that Indianapolis meet last year, because this was my first meet with a new coach and a new training style, which I didn't really go too deeply into that, but where my style before that was mostly focused on the squat, bench, and deadlift, minimal accessories. This is kind of the opposite, where yes, it was squat, bench, and deadlift, and that was the main lift, but then there was a lot more accessory work, and that was where I built a lot of the strength rather than just the heavy reps on the big three. So it was a completely new strategy for me going into a meet with a new coach for the first time. It was an away meet, which anybody who's ever competed at home meets versus traveling, it's a very, very different game. You're living out of a hotel usually, and eating from restaurants or whatever you have. You're at the mercy of the location. So everything's outside of your control, and you're going into an unfamiliar gym with mostly unfamiliar people that you don't know. So there's a lot of unknown variables that go into this. You don't know if you're going to sleep well the night before because you're not in your own bed. You don't know where you're going to be. So all these factors played a role. It was my first low bar meet that I had done, only low bar meet. So going into what was only a 5-pound squat PR was absolutely terrifying to me, especially since on my second attempt, I believe my foot had caught on the carpet and I almost wiped out, somehow recovered on my walkout and still got the weight. But yeah, going into that 705 squat on my last one, I was terrified. I don't think I've ever been so scared for a lift before.
Yeah, and that's always like, it's fascinating to me, and it's like just completely captivating to me to look at like, how do you overcome this like mental fear barrier? Because if you're competing, in my opinion, if you're competing in powerlifting correctly, at least that third attempt should be a weight that you're not 100% certain you can hit, is how I feel like. Like, I feel like if you're choosing a third attempt that like, without a doubt you're going to hit it, then you're probably not at true max effort. Now, there may be a reason that you're choosing that third attempt, like if you're trying to save it for a later lift, or if you're worried about an injury or something like that. Then yeah, that makes sense. But I've always kind of felt that, like, for me personally, if I'm going for a third attempt, like, I want to go out and do something that I'm not really sure if I can hit it or not. And the reason I want to choose a number like that is because, to me, like, the gratification that comes from the sport is fighting under something that I'm not 100% sure I can do. And that's like where everything we are comes from, you know, that like be impossible kind of mentality. And it's not going to work for every athlete, but it works for us. And, you know, it's what brings the most joy and gratification and satisfaction to us. And for me, it's like the entire gratification of the lift for me actually does not come in hitting the lift. For me, it's like, can I choose something that's out of my comfort zone? Not that I haven't prepared for it, but can I force myself to choose something that's outside of my comfort zone, knowing that I've put in preparation work? Can I face the immense, for me, it's obviously the squat is where the fear comes in. Anything over 250, 300 pound, it is just like heart-wrenching, like mind-melting fear for me every single rep. Even though I can squat 315 with pretty much no trouble, it's like it's there. And so like the for me, the whole battle of the lift is, can I choose something? Can I face that fear? Can I overcome it? Get myself to a place where I believe I can do it. And then can I take that weight to depth and not go too early because I got afraid of going to depth? Can I take it to depth and give 100% max effort coming out of the hole? So whether I hit it or not after that, I don't really care, but like, can I put myself in that position to do that?
So I'm going to counter part of what you said with one exception.
Yeah.
And I agree. You should be a little bit scared of your third attempt, I feel like, on squat and bench, but the lift where there is no room for fear is deadlift. Yeah. And I feel like one of the differences is the weight is not on top of you. So squat and bench, I understand the weight being on top of you, it can kind of feel like you're being crushed.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot more potential for injury if you fail. But you cannot pull a PR or a successful third deadlift if there's any amount of fear in you. And if you have any kind of doubt in your mind that that weight is going to go up, you don't know, then it's probably not.
Yeah.
You need to go into a deadlift with the mentality of that weight is coming up no matter what.
Yeah. And that's what, yeah. So that's actually what I'm talking about is like, for me, these numbers will cause fear. And then for me, the entire game becomes, how do I get myself to from a place where I'm like afraid of this weight to a place where I feel 100% confident that I'm going to hit this weight. Mm-hmm. Whether I believe it's within my physical capability or not, I have to convince, kind of like we were talking about earlier before we got on recording, there's a certain element of CNS training where you have to like, your body has to learn that it can handle this weight. Yeah. To me, there's this whole mental side of, I have to convince my mind that I can take this weight. And I have to go from being afraid of this weight to being 100% confident. But I agree with you. Like, if I don't get all the way there, then I'm not going to hit that third attempt. Yeah. So I have to like put myself in a position where I just go to this other place. And in that moment of the third attempt, like I believe that there's no weight I couldn't put on my back or grab onto or bench that I couldn't hit. That's where I have to get myself to. And if I'm not there, then I'm definitely not hitting that lift. So I definitely agree with you on that for sure.
And when you're talking about a meet, if you did everything right, then your final lifts should be something that you've never touched before.
Yeah.
Even in training. I mean, you should be hitting a PR that you haven't even hit in the gym if you've structured it right. Now, there's a lot of people, and I don't understand this personally, who have higher numbers in the gym lifts than they ever hit on the platform. And I think that's a training issue and a mentality issue if you're able to do that. I mean, I'm not totally innocent of it, but there's been other factors that play into it. But I mean, I've benched 501 in the gym, and the best I've ever hit in a meet is 485.
Yeah.
And I understand there are other factors that go into competition. You're not always going to be at 100% on everything, and some competitions it's like a marathon trying to survive through the whole meet, an 8+ hour meet, trying to stay fueled and hydrated and rested throughout the entire thing, and you're at the mercy of the judges for how far apart your attempts are and everything. So I understand all that, but like some people, there's a significant difference between their lifts. They might be squatting 50 plus pounds more in the gym or during prep than they ever hit on the platform. Same thing with deadlift. Some people will be pulling 800 pounds in the gym and then only pull upper 600s in a meet. And you go and you watch their training and it's like, okay, well, I see they're not training to standard, or they're pulling with straps exclusively through this entire prep, which is another topic. Don't get me started on that. But
that's something, that's really fascinating, because that's something we got. That was one of the huge pieces I learned from having Jaden on the show that I have applied to like every area of my life since then. It's had a pretty profound effect on me. Is what you're doing during training going to matter on the stage, whatever your stage is? For us, that would be a powerlifting platform. For him, that's a literal stage where he's posing. And it's really simple concept, but it's something I think that a lot of people, including myself, you get kind of blinded to the moment, and you're not thinking about that like end goal. And so is it like, does it make sense for me to lift with straps my whole prep, even though I can lift heavier? Is that going to matter? Is the deadlift I can do with straps going to matter on competition day?
Yeah.
No, it's not. like not really, And for him, it's like, he brought up the example that he struggles with, having been a competitive powerlifter and now being full-time bodybuilding. He struggles a lot with having to hold himself back in the gym sometimes in like certain areas of strength. So like he'll want to go max out deadlifts, but for him that doesn't make sense, because maxing out deadlifts is not going to make his erectors look better on stage.
Yeah.
Maxing out consistently or whatever. And it's also going to open up a huge chance for him to be injured. If he's doing that on top of the massive training volume he already has. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but it's going to fatigue him so much that he's not going to have a perfect chest day or arm day the next day, or whatever it may be. So that was just a really like kind of profound thing that it just kind of like lit my brain. I'm like, yeah. And so I've tried to approach it like, is everything I'm doing during training going to make me better in whatever my goal is on the platform? Because that's the other thing you brought up, is like, you can have different goals, and like sometimes you're chasing a deadlift, sometimes you're chasing a total, sometimes you're chasing a dot score. You may not always be like chasing the same thing every single time. Mm-hmm. And so for that reason, you may hold back a little bit on bench so that you can maximize your deadlift more, or mm-hmm. whatever it is. That's part of that strategy and art we talked about to the sport. But I think it's paramount that whatever your goal, first of all, you have to establish a goal. Like, I think there's so many people that do not have well-established goals. And that blows my mind, because how can you develop any sort of training or any sort of program without a really well-established goal, for whatever that day may be.
I'm gonna add, make it goals plural.
Yeah.
Don't just have one goal. Mm-hmm. If you go into a meet and you only have one singular goal, what happens when you fall short of that goal mentally to you? I know, at least myself, it's not great. You feel like you kind of wasted all your time, resources, and everything preparing for that. But if you go in with 3 goals and the mindset of, I would love to hit all of these, but realistically, I understand it may not happen. But even if you come out of that meet having met one of those goals, mentally, for me at least, I'm okay with that, because I still feel accomplished. Yeah,
and that's a great point to bring up, because you need to have structure to your goals, just like you have structure to your training program. Mm-hmm. And you can have goals in powerlifting, and you can have goals in family life, and you can have goals in business or work or whatever it may be that is important to you.
And the goals need to be realistic.
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm going to push back a little bit, because I like chasing unrealistic goals.
What's your definition of unrealistic?
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing, is I think it's different for everybody. Like for me, the 500-pound squat used to be such a big monumental thing for me. And I still want to hit that in comp. I'm going to do it in August here. I'm going to do it on a straight bar though, versus a Mars bar, just for my own personal satisfaction. But now it's like, I don't even feel like good chasing that as a goal anymore, because I think my potential is beyond that.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, it's a goal, but it's not like the goal I'm chasing anymore. I'm still going to wait until I kind of get into some off season here after this meet and see where we're thinking, where we're feeling, but I'm probably looking somewhere like 525 to 540 now for that meet is where I'd really, really like to be after a really good dialed in
I wouldn't argue that's an unrealistic goal though. I'm
true.
talking about unrealistic goals is I've talked to people at meets before, and just like before, like while we're warming up for squats, say, I'll ask them, what are you opening with? What are you planning on ending with? And they'll give me a number, and it sounds kind of high to me, just based on what I saw them warming up with. And I'll be like, okay, well, what's your current squat PR? And they'll tell me, and then the goal number that they told me was 100 pounds higher than anything they've even touched in a meet before.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's happened multiple times.
Oh my gosh, that's
not
wild.
just on squat, but with different people.
Okay,
and it comes from inexperience. I mean, people
maybe a little ego and arrogance in there as well.
It can, it can.
Yeah, so that's a really good distinction. Actually, I'm glad you said that, because there is a line. Like, yeah, there is a world of like unrealistic goal where if you built your training regimen to squat 500 pounds, you're not going to squat 700 pounds meet day.
Exactly.
Like, you're not.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're just not magically going to pull. You're not even magically going to squat 600 pounds, Now, certainly there's some times where you come out meet day and everything just lines up perfectly and you hit numbers that you never like imagined you'd hit. But those are generally not 100-pound higher. They're generally not 50 pounds higher, especially if you've got some experience to you and you've done several meets. So that's a really good distinction, because how I've always defined this, because we have to be very careful with the message we put forth in not like, we're not telling people to go out. Like, yes, we have the be impossible message, do the impossible, but it's not about going out and just believing so hard that you can do it, that you just like do something that is totally out of the realm of question, like 200 pounds higher than you've ever gone before. That's not what it's about. The way I've always told people to generate an impossible goal is actually, this circles back to something we talked about earlier. For me, I've always felt that that's something that should put a little bit of fear and a little bit of anxiety into you. So like when I developed the goal of the marathon, I knew I could run a half marathon. So like, to me, that wasn't like enough to get me excited for it. I needed something that like, I really was not sure if I could do it or not. And so that was a full marathon. And the same thing with like originally when I came up, well, way back when I first got into powerlifting, it was the 500-pound deadlift. Like back then I was like, I don't know that I could do this, because it was several years before I even got to 405, let alone up to 500.
You're closer to 600 now, aren't you?
Well, halfway. I've done 550. 550 is my deadlift PR.
Okay.
I've attempted 562 more times than I even care to admit. Failed it
Your
every
nemesis
single
number.
time.
The
Oh
nemesis
my God,
number.
it is. And I feel like once I hit 562, I'm going to soar right to 600, in like a couple years time. But man, that is the like sticking point. For
Everybody's got their number that they desperately want and is not even that far above what they've done before.
Yeah.
And every time they try, they seem to fail for one reason or another.
It's crazy. I hate that number so much. I'll even like I'll see Paul lift, an easy 562 or whatever. And I just hate seeing it on the bar. I hate like, it makes me physically angry because the times that I've missed it, there's like no reason I should have missed it. In December, in August, even last April, I attempted it. And like I should have, by every, like 540 flew for me in December. And I even had a technical breakdown on it. Like, so I should have been able to fix the technical breakdown and have an even bigger lift, but nope. It just like, I hit the, like, I get it off the ground, I break it off the ground fine. And it's like, I hit the sticking point where it's just like, I cannot force my body to go up, but I feel like it should go up. It drives me crazy, dude. Oh my God. But yeah, so like the going back to the goal thing, I say it should be something that gives you a little bit of fear. And I think that's a great gauge, because if I would say that I'm going to squat 700 pounds in August, that gives me no fear, because it's like not even within the realm of question between now and August. But if I said I'm going to go squat 470, that also gives me no fear, because I've done 462.
Yeah.
And like, I know that that's totally doable and within the realm. So my goal weight needs to be somewhere in between there. And I need to find that sweet spot of like, where do I have some like true, real anxiety and fear that I'm not sure if I can do this? Because I feel like, and not that this approach is wrong, it doesn't work for me personally. And I know it doesn't work for Austin. And I think there's just some people it doesn't work for. But like, for me, I don't get a lot of satisfaction out of going out and doing something like I know I can build to and I know I can do. Like at this point, 500 is a number like that for me.
Yeah.
Like I know I can go out. I know I can hit that if I have a good training and prep and everything. Like I want something that, to me, like the real gratification comes when I like overcome something that I'm not sure that I can do. And yeah, that means you're going to fail a lot. You're going to fail probably more than you're going to quote unquote succeed. But again, for me, I'm not trying to be, you know, at the very, very top. I'm not playing the game of, because that is a whole different game you have to play, I think, as well. And one that you have to think about, you know, like with your dots and stuff, you have to think about maybe pulling back on a bench sometime to hit a better deadlift, or you've got to play this game more intensely so that like you can hit a specific dots or you can hit a specific total. You know, I'm just not to the point where I'm trying to play that game. So to me, it's like, I would rather fail attempting something quote unquote impossible that I'm not sure I can do than succeed at something that I 100% knew I could do. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of been the gauge for me as far as a goal goes. Like, what gives me a little bit of fear? Because anything way higher than that would not even be conceptual, and anything way lower than that I wouldn't be nervous about at all. Because I see it a lot in powerlifting, and this is something that bugs me. I think it's in every sport, though. I see it in running too. People will be so afraid to choose numbers that they don't think they can do. Like they will hold their potential way back, you know, and they'll go up and their third attempt will just be textbook perfect, like easy. And I would never tell somebody they're wrong for how they like to go out and compete. But to me, I'm like, that person's mind is the only thing holding them back from achieving a higher potential.
One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy watching any powerlifting meet is when someone has a super easy third attempt and when they leave a bunch of weight on the platform afterwards. And there are people that will finish a whole meet and they'll be so pumped and they'll post, went 9 for 9 this meet. I would be a little bit embarrassed if I went 9 for 9, because that means I did not try hard enough. I left weight on the platform. If I'm not barely getting my third attempt, if I get a third attempt, then I definitely did not push myself enough.
Yeah, that's how I've always felt too, man. Like I never want to leave an ounce on. And so when I'm choosing those numbers, I'm like making sure they're kind of out of my realm of comfort so that I don't do that, you know. And that's a very hard game to play, because you want to choose a number just high enough that you can, or just high enough that you can actually hit it, or low enough that you can actually hit it, but high enough that it's not easy for you. And it should be a true max effort. And I think that's where it has to come back to having really good, solid foundational training and experience in the gym, because I think that's something you have to learn about your own body, is like having so much experience reps wise that you know that you're able to go out on the platform and know what kind of numbers you can choose, like what you can hit on that day.
Well, there's other factors that go into choosing your attempts too, because after you finish an attempt on the platform, you have a timer. You have 1 minute to put in your next attempt. And half the time you're seeing stars and you don't remember what really planet you're on. Yeah.
You're still recovering from the ammonia hit.
You're staggering over towards a blurry table. You hope you're going in the right direction. And suddenly you're trying to look at a chart and make sense of what all these kilos mean.
Yeah.
Like,
and then
these aren't freedom units.
Yeah, you got people like Wade whispering in your ear, like, you could add 20 pounds. Like,
don't listen to that. And then a lot of people who do have a handler or a coach, they'll tend to be a little bit more conservative. Mm-hmm. So a coach likes to say, my athlete went 9 for 9. Mm-hmm. My athlete didn't fail anything. But that's not always the best thing for you, because they want you to succeed and get the attempt. So they're not going to add that extra 10 pounds that you definitely have.
Yeah. And I've seen that in meets before. Certainly there's good coaches out there that will push you to that highest potential. But I think you're right that, like, there's a lot of coaches that more often than not, they'll be more conservative, thinking that maybe they're helping the athlete, but maybe they're also helping themselves a little bit. I don't know. There can be different intentions behind it.
It doesn't. Yeah, I'm not trying to say it's fully selfish on the point of their coach, and it's everybody's natural desire to want people to succeed.
Yeah. But yeah, a really good coach is going to know what their athlete needs and what their athlete is going for and what their athlete can chase, Mm-hmm. So it's a tough balance, but like for me, if I were having my coach call my numbers on the platform live, in the competition, my coach a really good coach for me would know that I would rather fail doing something that I wasn't totally comfortable with, or I didn't totally know I could do, than hit something that I felt was super easy. Like I would not want a coach to go out there in August and choose 500 pounds as my top squat. Like that would piss me off so much, honestly. So the coach has to know their athlete that way, but I think the athlete has to know themselves that way as well, because if you're a good athlete, nobody's going to know your body better than you do, is my opinion on it. So it's a really, really delicate balance. But yeah, you can't leave weight on the table, and you can't go so unrealistic from the get-go that it's just not even sensical. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge part of the balance here with everything. But kind of like we were talking about before we started recording, there's also a whole balance to not just competition day, but the entire training process in general. Because it would be great if we all had, all day long to focus on nothing but powerlifting.
Yeah.
Like, if you had the ability to just wake up and your only focus is like eating and prepping for training, then training, and then your only focus is recovery and fueling and sleep, and there's people who can do that, and that's great for them, especially if they are chasing that very, very highest level. But for, I think, most people out there, that's not a super realistic situation. So I know that that's something we talked about I personally struggle with, is how do I balance all of these priorities and these passions that I have and still feel like I'm performing at an adequate level in all of them. And I know that that's something you have to balance as well, both professionally with work and with your family life. You have 2 kids, and as well as with training and competing and being an athlete at that professional highest level. So I know that that's something I wanted to chat a lot about today, and I wanted to get your thoughts about how has that process looked in the past for you? How has it changed and developed and grown over the last year? And kind of how are you attacking that going forward?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's address one thing you said, competing at the professional level. And for people that necessarily aren't super involved with the sport or may not fully understand it, professional is a very subjective word in powerlifting. There are no professional powerlifters in the traditional sense of the word professional. Nobody makes a career just out of competing in powerlifting. Yeah. There are a few people that make their living off of powerlifting, but it's not just from winning meets. Yeah. It's their coaching, or they're a gym owner for a powerlifting gym. They have a business centered around it, something like that.
That's a really good distinction. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not like a NBA player.
Exactly.
Like you don't have a powerlifter out there making even hundreds of thousands of dollars, let alone millions of dollars from competing in the sport.
So even the very top people in the sport, look at someone like John Hack, who he takes first place in any competition he enters. It's not even close. Nobody can touch him. So if he exclusively enters in paid meets, he's going to take first place in all of those. But you look at the payout for those meets, and there's no meets that it's giving you more than 10 grand for first place, and that would be a very high paid meet.
Yeah.
And how many meets are you realistically doing a year? 3, 4? If you're really going to push it, maybe 5 meets. I've personally cut down. I did 3 last year, and this year it's looking like I might just do 1, possibly 2.
Yeah.
So you're not making that kind of money. The extra money he's making off the sport is through sponsorships. Mm-hmm. People are paying him to represent their supplements, their brands of athletic clothing, things like that. But after all of that, and after all the money he gets from all of that, and he even runs coaching, he does coach people or train people online, and he still has a day job.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good, that's a really good distinction, a really good point to bring up, because that's like something pretty unique with powerlifting. There's a lot of other sports, even lifting centered sports, where, I feel like there's strongmen who can make a career out of competing. Now, it's not many, but and a lot of them have the sponsorships and the businesses, and there's certainly bodybuilders who can make a career out of competing. But powerlifting, it is very, very, it's difficult to even do that. Like you said, in the case with John Hack, even with the sponsorships and the business, it's still difficult to do that in the world of powerlifting.
Yeah. So all these people, even the top athletes in the sport, still have their day jobs.
Yeah. So what is like a professional powerlifter? Like what does that term mean to you and in the sport?
Well, there's different qualifications based on the federation for what they're going to consider professional for the level. So to get the Arnold Classic is typically considered a professional powerlifting meet, and when I competed in it last year, the specific qualification for my weight class, the 275 class, was you had to have a 1900 plus total.
Okay.
And it was different for each class. It went up a handful of pounds. I think it was like 50 pounds per class or something like that. Some meets, like for the American Pro that I competed in last November, it was a 500 dots was the cutoff to compete. But just because you had a 500 dots did not mean you were going to get a slot in it. There were people that were kicked or bumped out who didn't. They may have just been right around 500, and they just didn't make the cut because they had a certain number of slots, and people above them would bump them out.
Yeah.
So 500 is typically the dots that people would consider professional. I know USPC has been running some more pro level events, and it's also been determined by the specific meet on what's considered professional. So some of their pro meets are 500 dots cut off, and then some of them they're considering 450 as a cutoff.
Yeah. Yeah, because people will make... So for people who aren't powerlifters, a dots is... Generally, it's like a way of relating your strength to your gender and your weight. Is that correct?
So it's just an equation of your total weight lifted between the 3 lifts versus your body weight.
Okay.
And it's just a different equation if you're a male versus a female.
Okay.
So if you were to take my exact numbers, so if I have a 2,000 pound total and I weighed in at, just say 250, I don't know what the actual number was. So I weighed 250 to the 2,000 pound total. my dots ended up being 531-ish.
Okay.
Now, if I were to take those exact numbers, a 2,000 total and a 250 body weight, and the only thing I change is male to female in the equation, which you'd use an online calculator for it. There's plenty of websites. And the only thing that changed was male to female. Suddenly, a 531 dots would become a 700 plus dots.
Oh, wow.
So a 500 dots for a female would be like a 350 dots for a male.
Okay.
It's very different, but the reason for it is hormone differences, muscle
Structural
differences, genetic differences between male and female.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not saying it's like something unfair. It's just it has to be different.
The best way we've come up with to try to equate, the gender versus weight, and because
it's
that
not
can
necessarily
affect how much
just
you lift.
for gender, but it's how you would determine. Because when powerlifting first started, it was just about total. There was no such thing as dots, and so the higher weight classes are obviously going to lift more than someone way lighter. So they ended up coming up with this system so it could be competitive. So someone in a lighter weight class had a chance against a 308 plus guy.
Now, does it take into consideration? So most people will just change the dots for like tested versus untested because there's no way to add that into equation. And then some people will change the
changes the requirements.
The requirements,
Yes.
not the score itself, but the requirements, the cutoff. And some people will do it for masters as well. They'll have like 3 different masters divisions, and they'll have a different cutoff for each one.
Yeah, I believe like for the American Pro, originally it was 485 for the tested, and then 500 for the untested.
Yeah. So people will do that to try to equate those differences in the divisions as well. But yeah, that's what the dot score is and why we use it and how it's come to be.
A lot of times they'll also subtract a few dots points for wrapped versus raw.
Oh, okay.
In order to pit them against each other in the same meet, because you're obviously going to get a few more pounds out of wraps on a squat than you would in just knee sleeves typically.
Yeah.
So,
for most people,
if they're competing against each other in the same meet, there may be a 10 dots penalty if you're competing wrapped.
Okay, so that makes sense. So then, but generally, for the most part, the professional level is considered once you get over that 500 pound mark. Is that safe to say?
I would say that would be the most common.
And so that opens you up to competing at professional meets, which is generally, those are invitation, correct? Like you have to get in.
Some are invitation, and some you have to put in an application for.
Okay.
So the Arnold last year that I did, I had to put in an application for. The American Pro, I believe, was the same. You had to. Some people got invites, early invites. So the invitations that came out were for people that they were trying to get first to come out.
Okay.
And then once those people were determined whether they're doing it or not, then they opened it up for everybody else to sign up for.
Okay.
And then some meets you get invitations for.
Okay.
I believe the Ghost Clash sends out invitations. I just this past week got an invitation to the Power Surge, which is it's in Chicago in September.
Okay, I never heard of that one before.
Power Surge is the longest running professional powerlifting.
Oh,
meet.
really?
Yeah.
Who sanctions that meet?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the federation. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter.
There's so many of them.
Yeah.
But it's the one last year. John Hack competed in that, and obviously he took first place in that one.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of big names who are doing it this year.
That's exciting. Is that something you're considering at this point, or is it too
not
close?
because of the timing?
Okay, too close to November.
It would be doable because I believe it was at the beginning of September. So I could compete in that and then have a handful of weeks off before I had to jump into another prep. But honestly, the reason I'm not doing it is because I'm going to a music festival in September, and it'd just be a week or two after that. And
that would throw things off too much.
Yeah, I think it was actually the weekend after, and even just financially.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a big expense competing in a meet.
Yeah, that's a big piece too that I honestly don't even know that we've talked a lot about, because I feel like a lot of times we don't even talk about it because it's something everybody has, and it's there, but it is another factor, like we talk about, to all of this balance. So when we talk about competing in powerlifting professionally, it really just means that like you're in this elite category if you've been able to hit a certain level of strength relative to your weight class, and relative to your gender as well. Mm-hmm. So you've been able to hit that class and be at that level. And I think you're one of the few people, I don't know anybody, is there anybody else at Monsters? I know Paul's doing a pro tested meet this summer, but I don't know is there anybody else? Drake and Heather, I guess, are doing pro meets now.
Yeah, Heather is well into the pro range now.
Yeah, she's her high 500s, right?
Her dots, no, it's right around, I think she just beat me by a couple of points. I think she might be right around a 535 dots, something like that.
Okay. Yeah, so we've got, quite a few. I think for one gym being the size that Monsters is, that's quite a few professional level powerlifters.
Not just gym wise, but considering the area, this is not an area known for strength. This is not a big city. This is not Cincinnati, or one of these cities where they're known for cranking out strength athletes.
Yeah,
like this area, people don't even focus on their fitness.
Yeah,
West Virginia flip flops between number 1 and number 2 for the fattest states in the nation.
Really,
it's not good for health.
Okay.
So when you're talking about the area and then one gym in one small town of a 30,000 population, and it's produced 3 pro level, and I believe Paul's pretty close to that.
Yeah, he's definitely getting.
He's right on
there.
The verge.
Yeah. And especially now with the weight cut he's done, and he's even talking about after this meet going down to 242 as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that alone, if he can maintain somewhat of the same level of strength, and even improve upon it in the future, that would probably put him pretty close to that.
Yeah, he's got the dedication and the work ethic and the drive. So within the past, was it probably 2 months maybe or less,
he's been doing this since the December meet.
He didn't start right away. Yeah, the weight cut. Did he start right after it, or
it was not long, maybe 1 or 2 weeks. It was not. He was doing it before Christmas. That's for sure.
So since the beginning of the year, basically, he has dropped from right at 300 pounds down to he's right around 260.
It was 264 today is when he what he like weighed
262 this morning. He sent me something like that. He's very close.
Yeah, he's right down there.
Yeah, he's right around 260. So I mean, he's lost almost 40 pounds.
Yeah.
Just in a few months, and he's been doing it sustainably, because a lot of people will do a fad diet, a crash diet, where they'll lose a crazy amount of weight in a very quick amount of time, and it won't be a healthy way. And as soon as they stop those extreme lifestyle changes, all the weight comes right back.
Yeah.
But no, he's doing it the smart way, and he's doing it through a very sustainable diet, a healthy diet, and through just working hard. Yeah.
And he got a coach too. He got a nutrition coach that helped him, wrote him up a meal plan, and I can't speak highly enough of him. He has stuck 100% consistency to this.
Yes.
He's hitting all his cardio, all his training, all of his meal plan, or all of his meals. Like, he is just stuck consistently. And he's battled with some weeks where it's hard, where his weight doesn't change or it goes up, and he's had to battle through some of the mental challenges that can come with that. And he's had some of the peaks and the valleys and the plateaus along the way, but one thing that has not changed is his consistency and dedication to it. I think it's a perfect testament to what you can do with just a good, calculated, structured weight loss program.
Yes.
Which is something that it sucks that is such a rare thing these days. You know, it sucks that that's a rare thing, but it's so awesome to see, because that's how it should be done. And I think he's going to be able to go into this next prep now and, maintain a lot of this progress he's made, and still be able to build a crazy amount of strength on top of it.
And that weight loss is not only going to help his dots, help his overall score, but his leverages for his deadlift are going to be so much better. And that's something that we've talked about, and I've worked with him on his deadlift because his deadlift was progressively going up, and then once his body weight hit a certain point, suddenly he was having trouble with weights that he had even previously pulled before. He's dropping deadlifts at the top because his weight was affecting it. It was getting in the way. Yeah. And he took all that straight to heart, and he's like, okay, I've got to fix this. And it's crazy how much everything's been working for him.
Yeah, he pulled, it was like 628 this week, I think. And now granted, he's been in a calorie deficit for months and months now. But it moved good. It moved good. I was really pumped to see that. I think once he, replaces calories and actually gets some glycogen in and gets on a good strength program, I think you're right. I think he's going to have a higher deadlift than he's had before.
It looks so much better and more natural to him because of his leverage improvements, just from losing some of that extra weight. Yeah, because you don't have all that weight pulling you forward, and you don't have your stomach getting in the way as you're trying to pull up with that bar.
Well, not only that too, but I noticed, because I was getting the same way. I was starting to push. I wasn't up to I was like 295 ish at the end. No, it wouldn't have been at the end of somewhere around the December time. I was getting up there, and I noticed that it massively impacted just my conditioning and my athleticism, like my ability to process oxygen and move in the way it was wild. I just hit this wall all of a sudden where I was like, things are not working, things are not going good. And so I've had to step back and cut some weight back from there, and I'm already feeling so much better because of that. Because I think that we see in powerlifting where these super heavy guys can lift super strong numbers, but I think everybody's got kind of an individual limit to where your weight can get so high that it starts actually negatively impacting your lifting.
Yeah, not just your lifting, but external factors in your lifestyle too. I know I have a cutoff where when I get above a certain body weight, my sleep quality goes down drastically because I'll be waking up drenched in sweat and my sleep apnea gets out of control. It's right around 250, I find, for me. Really? Now, granted, I get stronger when I get closer to the 260 mark, but when I'm below 250, I sleep so much better, and I feel like my recovery is better because of that. And so you got to balance it.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to balance, and that's kind of where we talk about, all of these things in your life that you have to, because you bring up lifestyle, with your work. We were talking a little bit before that powerlifting is not yes, strength helps with your work, but it's not powerlifting specifically, and being as heavy as you have to get sometimes is not always super conducive to your line of work.
It's yeah.
So,
or your health.
Yeah, exactly, your long-term health. So how do we start to approach, or I guess for you, what's been your approach over the last year and going forward with trying to balance some of these things?
Well, there's been a handful of factors that have changed in my life over the time, but I know leading up to the Arnold, during my Arnold prep, I had to make a lot of sacrifices that definitely negatively impacted my family in order to achieve the performance that I did. And that was the highest total I've ever hit. It was a 2,000 pound total. And all three of my lifts that I hit were PRs, personal records as well. But I kind of had to make a lot of sacrifices. I spent most of my time at the gym. I wasn't as frequent. I didn't do as much with my kids. It just hurt my relationship. There was a lot that went into it. Even with work, I mean, I was putting more into that than I was putting in effort at work. And then my body weight and my health had to go up a little bit, and that kind of negatively impacted things as well. So since then, I've had to dial back on certain things, and it definitely had a negative impact on my meet performance on those following two meets. I haven't hit a PR on anything but that 5 pound squat PR at that very next meet since then. and competing at the American Pro at the beginning of November. That was the worst meet I've had in a while. Not to say I didn't enjoy it. I had a blast, but going into it, I had some health struggles. It caused my body weight to be really low. I wasn't fueling myself as well as I needed to be. Mentally, I just wasn't really there for that prep. I had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life, so now I'm kind of trying to take a more balanced approach to everything. I'm primarily having to train on my work days while I'm on shift at work. And that's hard sometimes because I'm limited in time. For those of you who don't know, I'm a police officer here in Parkersburg. So fortunately, I have a very supportive department who actually gives us gym time on duty because they want their officers to be strong and fit. But sometimes a call comes out that you can't stay busy for, and you need to go. You need to throw your gear on, even though you haven't caught your breath yet, and you just pulled a heavy set. You just got to throw your vest and your gun on and run.
Yeah, so you may have to stop in the middle of a training session, or you may have a max effort training session that then you have to turn around and go straight on a crazy call for, where you actually need a lot of strength, and it's not gonna promote recovery a lot. So
more common than anything, it will be a day that I've planned on. I needed to lift just to get all my training days in for the week, which I train 4 days a week and I have 3 rest days. And I'm not super strict on every Tuesday has to be this day and every Wednesday has to be this day. I'll shift them around a day or two in either direction as long as I get my 4 days in. But sometimes I need to lift this day. Like this just happened to me. What's today? It's Saturday. So on Thursday, I worked Wednesday and Thursday this week, and I really, really needed to lift on Thursday. And it ended up not working out because we were super busy all day at work, and I just wasn't able to get to the gym that day. So yesterday, which I'd planned on being a rest day, after a full day of SWAT training and being in the sun and just being exhausted, here I find myself in the gym at 9 o'clock at night, still lifting. You do what you gotta do.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, I think back to like when I was in college, and it was a wildly different time back then. But those years that I had first like discovered and gotten into lifting, I could go to class, but then eat, sleep, and breathe training outside of that. Like I could, when I'm eating, I'm watching YouTube videos about lifting. I'm going to bed at 8 p.m. every single night so I can wake up at 4:30 to study and then go train. And I had that like I could put so much time and energy and effort and focus into it.
You're describing me perfectly in college too, when I first got into lifting.
And I think back on that, I have such fond memories of it. It's like a really beautiful time period of my life. And I think, it's good for people to go through stretches where you have that level of discipline with things. But then as you go throughout life and, you develop a career, or you build a family, or whatever it is else that, comes along, it becomes you start to have a significant set of really high level priorities, and you have to start balancing those, and you have to start finding a way to perform at a high level in all of those, even though sometimes training can conflict with work, or work can conflict with training, or, family life can conflict with training, or whatever it may be. So that's something I noticed that we had our daughter in June, and it's been the greatest thing I've ever experienced in my life. But at the same time, my training and my focus on the business and so many other things that we do. I also started an entirely new full-time job that's consumed a lot of my time in that time frame. So I've noticed I've really struggled with not necessarily balancing them, because I've got my priorities very well established. What I struggle with is feeling like I'm performing adequately in each of those areas. And so that's something that causes me a lot of like mental anguish. Like I'll always, not always, but a lot of times I'll feel like I'm not a good enough dad, or I'm not a good enough powerlifter, I'm not a good enough podcaster, whatever it is, and part of that is like, I really always like to hold myself to high standards, but part of it I think is just some negative mental energy that like I just don't need, and I don't need to put on myself sometimes. So is that something you ever feel like you battle with? And if you do, like, how do you work through that? Have you found any way to kind of combat that?
So like you said, you have your priorities in check, and that's something that I've worked towards. And the way that you combat it is you put those things, you put your family first, you put your job second, and then in comes your lifting, and you find you can't do the same thing that you were doing before because you just don't have the time or the resources. You have a certain amount, like if you look at yourself as a bottle of water and that's how much energy you have, and you've got 3 or 4 or 5 or however many different cups of water, or empty cups, and you have to divide yourself between all those things. And if you're putting so much into family than so much into work, you have less to be able to put into your training. So instead of training harder, which you don't have enough water physically to do that, you got to train smarter. So that's something that I've had to adjust, is my training, and I've worked with my coach, and he's awesome at working around me individually. And that's something that I was looking for when I hired him, is I wanted someone that was going to completely design everything for me specifically. I didn't want a cookie cutter program that he was sending out to 10 other clients. I wanted someone that was going to take my specific needs into effect, and I also wanted access. I wanted to be able to reach out to him whenever and actually hear back from him. So that's what I've got with Phil, and it's worked out amazing. So I told him, I'm like, everything you're programming me right now, if I go through the entire workout you gave me and do every single rep of every single exercise and all the sets, then I'm in the gym for 3 hours. I can't get it done. So he worked with me and was able to cut stuff down, and suddenly instead of 6 or 7 workouts or exercises throughout the workout, I should say, he's cut it down. I typically have 4, maybe 5.
Okay.
And we've moved certain things around. We've switched certain days. For example, on squat day, he was having me go from squats to Romanian deadlifts, RDLs, after. And then on deadlift day, I would do Romanian deadlifts, I would do deadlifts, and then he would have me go to good mornings with a safety squat bar or a straight bar or whatever. So we figured out, what if we were to swap those? Because it was taking me extra time going from a bar on the ground deadlifting to suddenly having to load up the bar to do good mornings with. So it's loading up a whole separate apparatus, and I mean, my weights take a minute to load.
When you're at the weight you're at, it takes a minute to get
if I've got 700 pounds
that could be
on
a whole workout in and of itself. It's just moving the plates.
99% of the time I'm lifting alone. I don't have somebody there helping me load plates between sets. So if I've got 700 pounds on the deadlift bar, and then I'm having to load 300-400 pounds on for some good mornings, it's taking me a minute to have to do all that. And then work my way up to my working weight. So he switched some things around. So suddenly I'll be squatting, and instead of going to RDLs and having to load another bar like that, I just got to drop a plate or two, and I'm doing my good mornings on a straight bar with that same squat bar. And then from deadlifts, I'll go to RDLs after using the same bar. There's certain things like that, and then cutting out certain exercises that take a long time to set up and substituting them for something that's a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because that's a simple change that saves you a ton of time, and that doesn't really negatively impact. You're not losing anything in your training session that way. So those are small things, and those are really good areas. And I think you can find those things in every area of your life too. Like really you can always be maximizing toward efficiency.
Trim the fat.
Yeah, exactly. So is that something that you've noticed you've really had to incorporate over just the last year? Is that something you've been working on for several years? Because I know your kids are starting to get older now.
That's something I've started to work on over the last several months.
Okay.
It was around the time of the Arnold that I realized there was a problem. Everything I had to put into that, like, okay, great, I got my 2,000 total, but at what cost?
Yeah.
And then it's been gradually working on it since then, but specifically the last several months, having to put more into the priorities.
Yeah. And that's, that I think that's where you just maybe have to come up with a process with it, where it's like, priorities have to be super foundationally, like you have to know what your priorities are, and that's going to be different for everybody. We've all got to figure that out for ourselves, and your priorities don't necessarily have to make sense to everybody else, but you've got to choose them for you and what you're chasing in life given the circumstances you've got. And so when you've got those priorities in line, then you can set up a goal structure for each of those. Like, what am I trying to achieve in each of these priorities? Because if you have priorities with no goals, then you're not really going anywhere, and from there, then you have to come up with the training plan or the action plan or whatever it is for each of those. But then there's some times where stuff just can't be that structured. Like, because to me, I've always been and what's always served me well with balancing everything I balance with the marathon and still competing in powerlifting and still running the business. Like, I could just priority, goal, training plan, structure. Like, I could just boom, boom, boom. But then we have Lily. And children are not structured things, like you can develop structure around it, like sleeping times and eating times. But even then, like, they'll sometimes move out of those. There's going to be days where things are moving along great, and there's going to be days where things are not moving along great. But not only that, I feel like that's not even like the point necessarily. Like when you, because one thing I've really struggled with is, when I have time that I get to be with Lily and I'm watching her, I've found that I'll have all these things going in the back of my head, like, oh, if I can get her to sit on this mat and play, then I can sit there, or then I can sit on the couch and edit videos and create posts and get all that stuff done. But then I have to, this is something I've been working really, really hard on, and I am very embarrassingly very bad at this, is I really have a hard time forcing myself to just be in the moment and enjoy my time with her and like help her learn and help her grow. And that's something that I hate to say it, I'm very embarrassed about that, but I struggle with that a lot, just like forcing myself to know, like, while you're with her and you have this time with her, enjoy this time with her and use this time with her to help her and to help me and to help us as a family grow. Because I get a little too focused on efficiency, and I think, oh, I can watch her and edit and post at the same time. Yeah. But if I do that, then the time with her is not going to be well spent, and the edits are not going to be that great either. Like, I'm going to sacrifice quality in both of them to try to achieve both. So that's something I've really been working hard on. Even today, before you came over, I was watching her, and I just, like, the whole time, I didn't look at my phone. I had to take a call with my mom, but that's my grandma's health's not doing great. That was a bit of an emergency situation, but I wasn't checking Instagram. I wasn't checking messages. I wasn't doing any editing. It was literally just like me and her, like, doing whatever we needed to do, whether I needed to feed her or get her down for a nap or whatever it was. And I feel like that was much more productive time for the family priority than I've generally been able to use lately. But I still struggle in the back of my brain, because I'm thinking, like, man, I'm letting things go in these other areas. Like, I'm going to have to find time to get these posts up and get these edits done. So I'm just going to have to carve out sleep, or I'm going to have to carve out something else, And I've tried to go through, and I think I've made progress in just, like, cutting out a lot of priorities, like things that, like, were not actually that important to me, because that's something else you can do, is, like, if you've got a list of 10 priorities, you're not going to maximize all 10 of those. Like, there's just not enough hours in the day. So how do you, or, how do you either like build systems to let you do that, or you can just cut out priorities if things are not actually that important to you. And that's something I've really had to work out over the last year as well. But yeah, that's one of the things I deal with the most is because I feel like if I go back and objectively look at it, like my lifting is progressing well. I feel like I've got a great relationship with my daughter. I'm performing well at work, and my health is better now than it's been in years. Mm-hmm. So if I look at it objectively, I'm actually doing quite well in the areas I want to do well in. I think I can always do better. I'm always chasing better. But I should be happy with where I am. And I still struggle with feeling like I'm good enough, though.
I think that's a common thing for parents, especially new parents or young parents.
Yeah.
Everybody deals with that. She's a little bit young right now, being 6-7 months, to be able to do this. But something I've personally learned with my boy is almost 4, and then my girl is just turned 2.
Okay.
And so I'm at the stage right now where there's always things that need to be done at the house. So if I'm off and I have the kids, which is pretty much every day I'm off, so I have the kids by myself all day. I look around the house and I see all these things that need done. Laundry needs done. Dishes need done. I want to sweep the floor. There's all these things that I can do, but I'm just leaving the kids to go fend for themselves, do whatever. And they're trying to get my attention the whole time, and it gets frustrating. So I've figured out, well, it's not the most efficient way to do things. If I need to transfer laundry from the washer to the dryer, both kids are right there with me. They're like dogs. They follow you around to every single room. They always want to be touching you, always want to be right next to you. So while it would take me 30 seconds to transfer the laundry by myself, I find if I'm pulling the laundry out piece by piece and hand it to one of the kids, they know how to throw it into the dryer. And of course it takes 5 times as long loading the dryer that way, but they're involved and they're just happy to be doing something with you. They don't care that it's a chore or something that like a person wouldn't normally want to do. They're just happy to be doing anything with you, and you're teaching them. You're teaching them how to do things.
That's really profound, actually, for me to, because you're right, like the thing that needs to get done is still getting done, and you're still eventually completing that. Yeah, eventually. Like it's still forward progress, even if it's slow.
Yes.
But you're also, because at the end of the day, like laundry is not on your priority list. Like, yes, it falls into that like family category, I guess probably is where it would fall in, and just like responsibilities, but like you're not trying to be the best at laundry. You're trying to be, but you are trying to maximize
if you're trying to be the best father you can be. At least in my mind, stuff like that falls under the umbrella of maintaining the household and being a successful provider and parent.
Yeah.
And I feel like if the entire house is trashed and there's dishes piled up and everything's dirty, I'm not doing my job as a parent and as the head of the household. Yeah. So I feel like I need to get those things done. So even like if I need to sweep the floor, we have a little broom and mop set for like toddler sized. So I'll give those to them. And as I'm sweeping the floor, they'll be pushing them around and helping, even though I've got my pile of dirt and I might have to remake that pile of dirt 4 times because they're spreading it around. It'll get done.
And I agree 100%. And I guess that's what I was trying to say is your goal isn't necessarily to get laundry done as quickly as possible.
No.
But you can kind of merge those two goals of spending time with them and teaching them and helping them grow, because by doing that you're teaching them, hey, like laundry is a priority. Like this is something we do to keep our house clean and keep our house well maintained and just to become responsible, efficient, hardworking people.
Yeah.
And so you're instilling those values in them at the same time and teaching that to them. And so that's a really cool mindset, but at the same time, you're still making forward progress in those areas, and you're still achieving that priority of spending time with them and helping them grow.
Yes.
And obviously that's not something my daughter can't help me with the laundry at the moment.
Like I said, you're not quite to that stage yet.
But there are things similar to that I can do. Like, for example, today, and this is something we try to do anyway, but today I was able to actually be really efficient at it because I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't trying to do all these other things that were totally unrelated. When she's in her high chair and I'm like feeding her, like there's certain things she eat, like I can give her a banana and she can just go to town on a banana, and I don't really need to help her with it. But I can still be there. She can still be there right beside me while I'm talking to her. And I was able to do pretty much all the dishes in the entire kitchen while I was helping feed her. So sometimes that works better than others. Sometimes that does not work as well. But it's still that same kind of concept where I'm still like engaged with her. You know, I've got music playing. She loves music, and so like we'll sing the songs with her and stuff like that. And so I'm still engaged with her, but I'm still like accomplishing something else that's in the same priority line as well. So that's actually a really good, pretty much any way we can find to maximize those is probably a really good thing to pursue. And then I guess the thing I struggle with outside of that is trying to like, because I used to be more systematic in like having like, you know, I train this on this day, and I still squat on Saturdays. A lot of actually ended up deadlifting today kind of randomly. I didn't intend to, but that's what it turned into because I needed a max effort deadlift day. But I don't have that anymore at all. Like I do the same thing. I train 4 days a week, but it can be totally random how that's spaced out and what days that ends up falling in. But then it's like I struggle with finding when is the best time for me to go, because I don't mind to go in and lift super early in the morning, but I personally just never have as good training sessions when if I'm training at 5 a.m., I just, my body is not as engaged and ready as it is, or is as ready as it is as if I go in and train like later in the evening. That's
how I am, but I don't even like training later in the evening because I find I'm tired from the day, and then it affects my sleep later, even if I don't take any pre-workout or anything. Just if I go straight from the gym and I get home late, then I just have a harder time sleeping. And
so that's where it's tough, because I'll feel like guilty if I go train late at night and miss time with my family, but I'll also feel guilty if I'm going and training early in the morning and not getting as good of a session as I could have. And maybe even depending on what time in the morning, maybe even still missing time. So it's like, it's a tough thing to battle. And I think there's a certain point where you just have to kind of not guilt yourself too much for it. But I don't know. I think I need to think about that a little more, because I've not spent a lot of time on it, but I know it's something I'm struggling with right now. But really, it sounds like the way that you've found to get in a much better spot balance wise is just to maximize the time that you're spending in each of these areas and making sure that it's actually in line with your goals and actually in line with your priorities.
Yes, for the most part. And part of it is, and it's not going to make me better at the lifting aspect of it, but part of it is just putting it in perspective. My entire life, anybody that knows me knows I just go from hyperfixation to hyperfixation, and I'll have something that I'll be completely focused on or will take over my life for a period of time, and it's the majority of what I think about or talk about or do for a while. And sometimes these might last a month, and sometimes they might last for several years. And so I feel like I've come out of at least a year to 2 years, I'd say probably 2 years worth of a hyperfixation on powerlifting, and I'm in a much healthier mental place with it, where it's something that I still enjoy and I'm still good at, but it's not something that takes over all my thoughts and all my time. And I'm able to look at it where if something happens and I am only able to get into the gym 3 days one week and I miss a day, then starting the next week I roll with it and I adapt. I don't beat myself up mentally over it, or I don't make other sacrifices in my life in order to make sure that the gym goal happens. So it's probably not the best thing to be the best I can physically be in the sport, but it's a way healthier way to look at things.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think so, because a lot of that, like the things I talk about, like that, just like fear of feeling I'm not adequate in a certain area, or the feeling of like guilt for like missing a session or missing time with your family, like that's not actually positively serving you in any real way. All that's doing is occupying mental space that you could be used towards focusing on whatever it is you're actually doing at that time. So I think you're 100% correct there. And that's where I've really had to like, because I know my priorities are really well established, and what I need to get better at is actually following through with how those priorities are established. And that's something I've already decided. Like I had said for a long time I'd do the 500-pound squat in April, and I actually decided pretty early on after December, because up until about mid-January I was really not in a good spot with my health, and I ended up deciding pretty early on, I was like, I'm not going to force this 500-pound squat in April. Like, I know that if I go through, I can force it and I can make it happen, and like I will find a way to do it, but I know that I'm going to leave weight on the table as compared to if I were in a very healthy spot and I were really in line with my training and my priorities. I'm like, I'm just not going to force this right now. And so I decided to move it back to August. And right now, August is looking like a really good, really great timeline. But if something comes up between now and then, I'm got myself now to the point where I'm okay moving that back to December if I need to. Because what I've really been trying to tell myself is like that powerlifting is fourth on the priority list. Like I've got 4 main priorities in my life, and powerlifting is last. So like I should never be treating it from a timeline standpoint as if it's first. Now, one thing I really try to do, and I'm really bad at this, but I'm trying to be a lot better at it. I think I've made some progress. Is I'm trying to get to where when I'm training, that is number one priority right now. Like when I'm training, I am training, and that is like my main focus. And then when I'm at work, I'm at work, and I try to make that my main focus. And when I'm with Lily, I'm with Lily, and that's my main focus. So I'm trying to do that because I think it helps that maximizing the time and energy that you have in those areas. But from a whole timeline standpoint, I can't spend even 4 days a week, but I can't spend 3 hours a day in the gym each time I'm training. Like I do not have the hours in the day. If I did that, I'm cutting time out of somewhere else. And for me, it comes out of sleep a lot. But then the issue with that becomes, if I just start going on, I like, people online will put out this concept of like, oh, just sleep less. Like you wake up early and you work into the night, and like, that's just what you do if you want to win. And that's all well and good, but like, we all need at least a certain amount of sleep, and for me, if I start getting under 6 hours a night regularly, my performance in every area goes way off the cliff. Like it gets really bad, and my recovery gets horrendous. So now, granted, with Lily, sometimes that just happens and there is no controlling that. But that's a totally different situation. But if I'm sacrificing sleep so that I can train, then I'm actually sacrificing my top priority so that I can achieve in my bottom priority. And that just does not make sense. The whole system's going to fall apart if I kept pushing in that direction. So I've tried to get better at just expanding the time horizon and recognizing that everything does not have to happen right now. Like, keep your priorities in line and adjust your time horizon with them accordingly. Because I think powerlifting especially is a sport that people tend to not have a lot of longevity in, but I think it's a sport that people can have a lot of longevity in if you approach it more intelligently. And depending, like, no matter what your level is, whether you're at the professional level like you are, or you're just doing it purely for fun like I am, I think you can still find longevity in it. And so hopefully I can, I've played around with benching in a shirt now, and I found that I actually really, really love it. I've really got a lot of passion for it. But I'm not going to just throw away all my goals and just dive after that 100% now, which is something I probably would have done, a few years ago with where I was in this process. So now I'm like, maybe in a couple years I can come back to, benching in a shirt. Once I hit my raw goals, maybe I'll spend some time there, but it's just having this, like, expanding the time horizon and allowing myself to actually treat my priorities as they're established. It doesn't seem like it should be something that's hard, but it's something I've definitely found I struggle with a lot. Yeah. So,
talking about the different disciplines of powerlifting and switching between those and everything.
Yeah.
We talked about my coach briefly earlier, Phil Herndon, and it blows my mind. I'd love to pick his brain on how he does this, but he competes quite frequently. I don't even know how many meets he does a year, but seems like every 2 months he's doing another meet. That's and crazy. He'll jump into a meet when he's 5 weeks out from a meet and do a mini prep and go in and set another world record. But what's really unique about him versus a lot of pro powerlifters or people at that level is he competes in all 4 powerlifting disciplines, or if you want to call them all 4. He'll compete raw, wrapped, single ply, and multiply, and it's like he rolls the dice, I think, and whatever it lands on, that's what his next meet's gonna be, and then he'll do a handful of weeks prepping with that discipline, and then go out and set another world record.
That's absolutely. I knew. I guess thinking back, he really has jumped around a little bit, because what was it? Was he multiply when he did that, like, 1,200 pound squat, or was that single ply?
No, that was
multiply.
So he has the world record in the 275 for squat, I believe, in raw, wrapped, single, and multiply. I believe all 4.
That is wild. Because if I've learned anything, this being single ply in the shirt is the first time I've ever played with, like, true geared lifting. I did a wrapped meet last year for squat. But this is the first time I've really played around with, like, actual equipped lifting, and I've learned that it is, at least to me right now, it feels so different that it's almost an entirely different sport.
Yeah.
Like, that's how different it feels to me. So I cannot imagine. I mean, I guess that's what I'm going to do. I'm doing a single ply bench meet now, and I'm going to do a totally full power raw meet in August, but I'm certainly not doing anything in between then. Yeah. And it's like, I'm just doing this shirt meet as a fun thing to do with some of the other members in the gym. I'm not chasing a world record by any means. So I cannot imagine how you could possibly jump from that, not just physically, but, like, mental focus as well. Yeah. That would be really interesting to hear. And you certainly see people that can do things like that at very high levels. Like, there's a guy in the entrepreneurship world I follow named Jesse Itzler, and he goes from all these crazy things. Like, he'll build a multi-billion-dollar jet company, and then build a multi-billion-dollar coconut water company, and then build a multi-billion-dollar running company. Yeah. It's just like thing to thing to thing to thing. And so I've always been fascinated for, like, people who how can you do that? And the number one thing that I've seen, kind of going back to the priority discussion, is those people are impossibly good at compartmentalizing. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if Phil is maybe this way. Like, regardless of anything else, like, when he's prepping for that multiply meet, he is 100% focused on his multiply goals and that multiply meet and everything he's doing for that. And then when he jumps, I wonder if when he jumps to raw, if he becomes 100% focused on that, that's how I know a lot of these guys that I follow, they do it. Like, when he's building that jet business, like, that is where it falls in those priorities, that is 100% focus to him. He's not thinking about, like the company he might build after this company.
Yeah.
He's just only thinking about the thing ahead of him. And so I think it becomes this balance of, well, not even just a balance. I think it becomes how do you get really good at being really focused and compartmentalizing each of those priorities? Because I could see that, and that's really what I've been trying to do with my priorities. I could see that as being a really powerful thing. Obviously for you, when you're at work, it does not serve you to think about a lot of things outside of work, especially when you're on a lot of those calls. Yeah. Is that something you notice you have to like build a skill at? Or is it something you've got a natural skill at?
Are you talking about like being able to switch gears like that quickly? And
yeah, just for like anything, like not even just work, but like with training and with family life and things, everything you're chasing right now.
I feel like to be good at anything, you need to be able to do that to a certain degree. Especially, we were talking about Phil competing at that level. You were wondering if he is good at that. I feel like you have to be to be at that upper level at anything in the world. But yeah, I feel like I'm good at my job, and I'm good at the lifting, and I'm good with my family. But yeah, you just have to, when you're there, you have to be there, to be locked in, and keep everything else out. When I'm on a call at work, that's what you're focused on, and you have to flip the switch over completely to that. I can't be standing there talking to somebody who was a victim of a crime and remember all the details of everything they're telling me if I'm thinking about what I'm going to be lifting here in an hour. Or I can't spend the quality time with my family if I'm thinking about a call from work. You got to be able to turn that off as soon as you go home.
Yeah, and you have to turn that off as soon as you jump to each priority, because same thing, you're not going to have the best training session if you, and like there's times where this is easier than others, I'm sure, but you're not going to have the best training session if you're thinking about something that happened at work that day the whole time.
Well, unfortunately, that's what happens to me quite frequently, because I have to lift while I'm on duty still.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I'll mark myself busy, 10-6 out of service, for that duration of the lift, but that doesn't mean the group chat from work isn't blowing up with be on the lookout for this vehicle. It was just stolen last night from this location and is probably still being driven around town. So I'm making a mental note. Okay, 2008 blue Camry with an Ohio plate. I've got to keep that in the back of my mind. And then at the same time, I'm getting a call from somebody in the task force asking me to go check out a house for them. We're looking for a certain vehicle in connection to that. And then I'm getting a call from a supervisor asking me, okay, as soon as you're done at the gym, I need you to go do this or go do that.
And then you've got to go max effort deadlift.
Yeah, and all of this is between every single set.
Yeah.
And that's going on for the full 2 hours I'm at the gym.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah. Do you have any good strategies or ways that you kind of, it's almost like compartmentalizing within the compartments, if that makes sense? It's like you've got the like a file folder, and you've got like a file for each thing. You've got to try to switch back and forth between really quickly. Do you have any good strategies for that?
There's not.
No.
I just
you just do it.
Just hope that that day I don't have as many distractions.
Yeah.
There's really no way I've found to get around that. And the other thing is, when I'm training, when I'm on duty, I can't blast music when I'm working out.
Yeah.
If I have music on at all, half the time I don't have any music because I gotta listen to my radio still.
Yeah.
And if somebody's getting shot, I gotta throw my stuff on and go.
Exactly. And that's where it sounds like maybe it just comes back to keeping this priority structure at the center of what you do. Because I would, while you're on shift, even if you're not or you mark yourself as busy, you're still on shift. And so at that moment, you can put as much time as you can into powerlifting, but at that moment, your job still has to be a higher priority than powerlifting. You can't just not show up to a call because you've got a set of deadlifts to do.
There's been plenty of times that I've had to leave halfway through my workout, or I'll get to the gym and I've taken my pre-workout and I am ready to go and I'm mentally dialed in, and then some horrendous cluster of a call comes out, and even though I was about to mark myself 10-6 for the gym and my face is itching from the pre-workout and I'm ready to go, suddenly I have to abandon that and I have to go to this call. It just happened this Wednesday. I had taken all my stuff and I was on the way to the gym and I was ready for a good lift, and I get a call. We're about to go hit a trap house. We've got a search warrant for this trap house, and this is the last day for the search warrant. It needs to be executed now. They need all the SWAT guys that are working currently to go help task force and hit this house. And I ended up having to do that, and it didn't end up just being hit the house and you're good to go. We ended up arresting somebody or a bunch of people out of this house, actually. Turned it into a whole ordeal, and suddenly there goes my entire morning, the only chance I had to lift, and I didn't get the lift until 7 that night, something like that.
Yeah. Which
is when I got off shift.
Yeah. Which is then, you're not, after doing a whole day of that, you're not going to be as fired up and dialed in and ready to go as you probably would have been.
Didn't feel as good for sure, but I still got it done.
Yeah, and you still got to get it done. But that's where like you just had to look at that priority structure and say, hey, this is a higher priority for me now. I need to execute here, and then later I'll have time for this other priority.
Yeah.
And I think that's where really we all just need to get to, is be able to look at that structure and know what that structure is and decide what that structure is for us. And once you decide that, you've got to make decisions accordingly and feel good about the decisions you make when you make them. That last part is definitely what I really struggle with. But I mean, if your priorities are truly in line where you want to be, you should be able to feel good about what you're deciding, as long as you're deciding in according to where they lie.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely got to be a massive thing to tackle. And because of that, it will impact your training. But if, being a good officer is being a higher priority for you, which, I know it is, then you're going to execute accordingly to that.
Yeah.
So,
and the other aspect to all that, you briefly mentioned something about it earlier, but we didn't really delve into it, was powerlifting is not always conducive to the skill set that I need for this job. I mean, sometimes it really helps. You'd be surprised how an 800-pound deadlift translates into manhandling a 150-pound crackhead who's trying to fight me or take my gun. It actually helps, but not necessarily when I have to go take the biannual SWAT PT test and I have to go run a mile. And I weigh 260 at the time because it's a couple of weeks before a meet. So...
And you've got as much muscle mass as you do, which is using insane amounts of oxygen too,
Exactly.
Yeah. That's where like runners, really good endurance runners, will look like they have no muscle mass on them almost, especially on their upper body.
Yeah.
Because they actually try to get less muscle mass in their upper body, because every ounce of muscle you have is just more oxygen you're using.
Yeah.
That you may not necessarily need to use to fuel running. So yeah, that's got to be a wild thing to balance. So do you see, I guess that kind of brings me into like what's next for you? Like, what are you chasing right now? Do you see yourself do you still have big powerlifting goals that you're immediately chasing? Or do you see yourself kind of taking a step back for a little bit from that as some of these other things become higher priorities for you? Or like, what's on the horizon for you?
So my original plan, I had been meaning to compete at the April 5th meet here at Monsters, you mentioned at the beginning, and I've kind of had to abandon that. I recently got sick with that horrible flu A that's going around to everybody, and then it turned into pneumonia, and I was out for over 2 weeks out of the gym. Lost a lot of weight through the course of that. I went from 258 down to 240 just in about 3 weeks.
It's like 20 pounds. That's wild.
It was horrible. I'm at the point now, it's been about 2 weeks that I've been back in the gym, and the first week of that was pretty much just a formality. I was there, but I wasn't really accomplishing anything because I couldn't even hit a light set of an accessory lift without almost passing out. I just couldn't catch my breath.
Yeah.
This past week of training has actually been productive, and I'm starting to build back at this point, but that's going to be a process, and there's no way I'd be ready by April 5th. So I kind of had to abandon the plans for that meet. In addition to that, that biannual SWAT PT test that I mentioned is the first Friday of May.
Okay.
So it'll be a month after that meet date. So I'm going to have to be able to get to the point where I can run a timed mile much quicker than is comfortable for someone of my size and weight.
How fast do you have to run it?
It's 8 minutes and 55 seconds.
So you have to run faster than a 9-minute mile at 260?
Yeah, it's dependent on age. Okay. So fortunately, I am 30 now. Yeah. And it went from 8:15 to 8:55 when I turned 30.
It was going to be an 8:15?
Yeah, it was a lifesaver. I'll tell you that.
That is insane. Yeah. That is wicked fast. Yeah. For somebody of that size. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not possible.
Oh,
we have one of our team leaders is about 255 and runs a 6 minute and change mile.
Jeez.
That's and also incredible. Can bench over 400 pounds on any day of the week. So he's built a little bit different though. He's an animal.
Yeah.
But not everybody is that gifted.
Yeah. Well, that's an insanely impressive feat of athleticism to run a 8-9 minute mile at 260 anyway. But then to be somebody like him, where you're just an absolute freak, and you can go you can do a 6-minute mile, and then you can go straight to benching 400 pounds. Like that's absolutely crazy.
With it comes, obviously we're talking about balance. Yeah. And there are sacrifices to be able to do that. The amount of training.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And
I don't actually think he sleeps
really
ever.
Yeah. That's wild. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to sacrifice a lot somewhere, to be able to maintain those levels, because then this always bothers me. Some people, certainly genetics play a factor in a lot of things that we chase, especially athletics, but I think people use genetics as an excuse too much of the time to leave stuff on the table.
Yep.
And that really bothers me a lot when I see that, because it's like genetics are almost an irrelevant factor in your own personal growth, because you can't change the genetics that you're built or that you're born with. I mean, you could dive into the world of epigenetics, but that gets a little more in depth. But like you're born with the genetics you have, so you might as well focus on maximizing what you can in whatever area is important to you. And I promise you, your genetic potential is going to be leagues beyond whatever you would just think it would be at the start.
It's the mental aspect of what really holds people back.
100%. And so that's something that we really, really heavily focus on, because that was like one of the life-changing, life-defining moments for me. Like what led me to lifting was when I came out of cancer therapy, I was in a horrible spot mentally and emotionally and physically. I was just in a bad spot everywhere. And I'm getting pretty deep into alcoholism, because I was just like running from all of this stuff that was going on with me. And it was, I just randomly got into, I'd done some running pre-cancer in high school, but nothing like super serious. It was just something I did on the side. And so I just randomly kind of got into that again. And I went out and went from running 0 miles to running a half marathon in like 4 months. And when I did that, I remember crossing that finish. This is one of those memories that's always going to be imprinted in my brain, is like, I remember crossing that finish line and I'm like half in tears, and the paramedic guy thinks that I'm like like physically not okay, and I'm like, I promise I'm fine. I was having like a total like mental breakdown, but not in like a bad way, just in like a good way of like, if I can do this, like what else can I do, and that was a really big moment that kind of switched the direction it wasn't like it fixed all of my problems immediately, but it switched the direction I was heading in pretty profoundly. And so like ever since then, I've always been obsessed with how can I leverage my mind to maximize my own potential. And that's so much of what we do here. And that's why I've always been really fascinated with a lot of people we bring on this show. But I know that that's something like you're really good at, is you have this like mental drive to like push yourself to these extreme levels. And I don't think there's ever going to be a situation in a competition where it's like your mindset and your belief in your own potential that's going to be the thing holding you back. I don't think that's not going to be a thing for you. So I love delving into the people who have those mindsets and learning like, how do you build that? How do you maximize that? How do you grow that? How do you get to a point where you've built what you've built? And I think, there's a lot of powerful lessons in there as well. But yeah, certainly, I think there's a big issue in the world today with people. And I don't know always where it comes from or where it starts. It can be different for everybody, but we certainly have a big issue with people's mind and mentality being the thing that holds them back the most beyond anything else. And not even just in powerlifting, but with everything. You see, like you talked about earlier, West Virginia flipping between first and second, and was it like the most unhealthy state?
The highest rate of obesity.
Oh, okay. Which goes hand in hand with that. So, in a lot of cases, it's not that people can't lose the weight. It's not that people can't get healthier. It's not that people don't have genetics to be able to do so. But you'll hear a lot of times when people talk about that, you'll hear this whole like, I've got a slow metabolism, or like I don't have good genetics, or all these things. And I'm just using this as like one example. You can apply this example to everywhere, but I hear all the time, and this is why we use the statement. We use that statement, limitations don't exist. And it's a pretty abrasive statement, but I love that statement because it's really shocking to people. And then we follow that with like, the only limitations that exist are the limitations you choose. And I think that that's so true in a lot of cases, because we often limit ourselves so much sooner than our genetic potential or our athletic ability or whatever it is actually limited. Our own brains can limit ourselves more. And, you hear it all the time anywhere, like, I could never do that. Or, people come up with these reasons and these limitations. And, that's so much of our goal, is to try to help change that in people and help see more potential in themselves. And I think the way to do that is just to go out and start chasing that potential. But what's some of your thoughts on like, how can people tap into that mentality piece? How can we start to correct and turn around this mental limitation that so many of us have in all these areas?
I think you need to realize or get rid of any sense of entitlement. I think that's a huge problem overall with our society nowadays, is too many people have a sense of entitlement and think that they're owed anything. That's not how the world works. You have to work for anything that is worth having. And people nowadays just feel like they should be given things, and they should just have things without the process of having to earn it or work for it. So if you're able to realize and get rid of that sense of entitlement and realize that unless I work, unless I earn this, it's not mine, then you're never going to achieve anything. And I think that's a huge factor in holding people back.
That's a really good point, because in line, like right along with that, if you believe say your genetics, for example, if you believe that's the thing that's holding you back, then you're never going to have, and you feel like you're just like, oh, it must be nice for those people who have good genetics, but I can't do that, because I don't have genetics. And you're going to look at the world as like this thing that's unfair. And if you feel entitled to that thing that you don't have, then you're going to feel cheated and like the whole world and the whole system's against you. And there is no positive path forward from a mindset like that, I don't think. But I think that's where a lot of people easily can fall into. And it's just not going to serve out anything moving forward. And by giving that much power to this thing that you can't control, you surrender your own personal power as well, and your own personal influence over the situation. So if you take something, there's things out there that aren't your fault. Like, it's not your fault you got cancer, but there's multiple ways going forward from that. You can either say like, oh, I've got cancer, I can't chase any of these goals I have for lifting or anything because my body's too damaged from whatever it may be, or you could turn around and say like, it's still my responsibility to be the strongest human I can become. And it's not my fault I got cancer, but still my responsibility to work through it and overcome it, or you can apply that to any area. And I think if you take responsibility over these areas that, may not be your fault or, may not have control over, by taking responsibility of it in the converse, you actually take power and control over that area as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I don't know how to say it much better than you just did, honestly.
No. Well, you helped me realize that by saying what you just did, because I'd never thought about it that way. But if you have an entitled sense of view of the world, it's automatically like the reason you're going to develop so much negativity in your life because of that is because you will automatically surrender power to these things that you can't control. And
shifting the blame to other factors, anything else, really, other people, whoever you can, to make yourself feel justified in the way you feel there. It's just not productive.
So what do you think, and I know this is like a big problem and we could have a whole 3-hour discussion on just this, but like, what do you think some of the first steps forward we need to make as a society to kind of shift away from that perspective and get into one that's more accepting of our own personal responsibility and beyond that, our own personal power over situations?
I think you just have to come to the realization that you're not owed anything by anyone. And our modern society, I'm not trying to get into politics or anything, but even with our culture of getting offended by things, just even being offended by something is basically saying that you're owed certain reactions by other people for no other reason than that's because how you feel about something. And I mean, if someone's a decent person, they're going to want to take into account how they're acting and their actions for other people, but they're not owed that. You're not owed that. So even just the very act of being offended by something is indicative of exactly what we were talking about, the entitlement. So just our entire modern culture, cancel culture, being offended by things, I think contributes to the entitlement. And so you just have to kind of break that whole mindset and just realize I'm not owed this, so I just got to do what I need to do to be able to accomplish my goal. And not everything is going to be in my favor. Everybody's going to have factors outside of their control that are going to be a detriment to their goals. So once you accept that and you just realize you got to roll with the punches and work with what you're given, then that's the only way you're going to be able to move forward.
I really love that perspective. I'm glad you actually brought up that topic, because I don't think that's something we've really talked about before, but it's interesting, since I've had my leg cut off, it's been this like recurring thing. And I don't know when this shifted for me. I think I've had this kind of mindset for a long time, but I'll have people all the time, like, they'll like, obviously you get stared at, and then people will like want to ask you about it, but they're afraid to ask you about it. You know, you get that kind of weird social awkwardness. But I've had people always tell me like, I don't want to offend you, but you know, what happened to your leg or something like something along those lines. And my mindset has grown to be, and I always tell people like, I won't give you the power to offend me. Yeah. Like I won't allow you to offend me. Like if you offend me, I've always viewed that as that's my fault. Yeah. Because I haven't got myself into a position, or I've given that person more power over my view of myself and my own personal situation.
That's how you have to look at it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And while there are people out there that are going to try to hurt you and going to try to tear you down and going to try to bring you down for whatever it is that you may have going on in your life, they can only actually do that if you give them the power to do that, you know? And so, it may not be fair, but would you rather give them the power to do that or give yourself the power to not allow them to do that? Is kind of the way that I've looked at it, you know? And I don't mean that to say like I'm immune to any of the mental struggles that come with having one leg, as an example. Like literally just earlier today, like a lot of the struggle, I pretty much have no like embarrassment of being an amputee or any concerns around that. But the thing that really upsets me a lot and really makes it hard is the times when, like, if I'm playing on the ground with Lily, I generally have to take my leg off because it's super difficult and awkward and uncomfortable to sit just on the ground with a prosthetic on. And so I can't just like, if I'm holding her and she's like asleep or something, I can't just get up and bring her back to her crib or lay her down or something. It's those moments that really bother me a lot. Like I have to lay her down. And even if she's not asleep, like I just have to put her down, and she may cry while I put her down and I put my leg on. And that deeply bothers me sometimes, just like emotionally, but it's something that just like, it is what it is. Like, you know, and it's not really something I can change. Yeah, I could get better at getting up off the ground with one leg, but then it's like, I don't really trust myself enough to do that, because I don't want to put that kind of risk that I would like fall in the process and potentially drop her or land on her, God forbid, or anything like that. So those things really bother me, but I have to like work past that and just say like, this is just a challenge that I have. And yeah, it's not fair, but it's still my responsibility to overcome and still be the best father I can be despite that challenge.
But even then, this whole problem is something that's only from you, and you're not allowing it to be a problem caused by somebody else. Yeah. So you're assuming the responsibility for it, and you're not giving somebody else the power of causing an issue.
Yeah, exactly. Because I would never, like, somebody could call me a bad father, and I would never allow that to faze me at all. You know, I guess that's a good way to go along with it. I guess only allow myself to offend myself, if that makes sense.
Well, it's not. But that's not
really what I'm doing. That's just.
I'm just saying, like,
but yeah,
your only problem with being an amputee is something. It's not an external problem.
It's because of a standard I hold myself to.
Yes, exactly. There we go. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. It's a standard you've created for yourself, and you feel like you haven't reached that. It's not being out in public and seeing someone staring at your leg and deciding you're going to confront them about it because you have a problem with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess to kind of tie that back to where we started with some of this discussion is like, that's just who I am as a person. I would rather hold myself to an impossible standard and fail sometimes in pursuit of that standard, but succeed in sometimes in pursuit of that standard than I would just succeed at every standard because I set my standards so low, if that makes sense. You know, because the other way I could go about that is I could just never sit on the floor with my daughter. But at the same time, am I being a good father there? No, not nearly as much. So
the whole indication that you are a good father, even if you feel like you're not up to your standard, is the fact that it does bother you because you're constantly striving to improve. Yeah. And you want to be a good father.
Yeah. And I think that's where we all need to get to a place where we're all trying to grow and improve. And we have another saying we like to bring up on the show, which is like, you got to have an unruly faith in your own potential. And like, what we mean by that, I guess, is like, you've got to allow yourself to believe that you can go to levels in anything you're chasing that you wouldn't normally allow yourself to believe. Okay. And you've got to believe your potential is higher than you would rationally think it is. And I guess the reason we do that is because I always think about like, I'd rather lean a little too far in that direction than not enough.
Yes.
You know, because I'd rather believe my potential is a little bit higher than it is than set my potential lower than it is.
No,
just
absolutely.
all these different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That, you know, we need to get to a spot where we accept our personal power over the situation we have. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of things that you have no control over, and we're all going to have that in every single situation. But if we maximize the control and the power we have on the things that we do have control over, and accept responsibility of the situations as they're presented to us, whatever they are, then we're going to move in a far better direction, be in a far better spot than we would the other way around.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping on today. I've honestly really gotten a lot out of this, and I've really like gotten some new pieces to think about going forward. So I appreciate everybody that comes on the show, but I really appreciate your insight because,
absolutely,
you know, I've kind of talked to you a little bit about this last year, but I know Austin and I both, but I've especially always kind of looked at you as, I know we're the same age and everything, but I've always looked at you a little bit as like kind of a role model in some areas of like, I've always respected how you work really hard to be a really good father, and you work really hard to be really good at your job, and you work really hard to be a really good athlete at the same time. So I think you set an excellent standard that we all can strive to emulate in that regard.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I wish I always felt that same way about myself.
See, that's the same thing, because there's people that could say that to me and I would be like, oh man, I do not feel that way about myself.
Yeah.
You know, but that's probably good, because if you feel that way, then that shows you're not ruled by that sense of entitlement.
Yes, exactly.
So that's probably as much of a weird thing as it can seem. That's actually probably a good indication.
I agree.
All right, man. Well, wanted to just get like kind of what's next on your radar. I know the April meet is going to be put on hold or moved back to something else in the future, just because you've got some other goals you've got to take care of with work, and you had that illness that would keep you from being at, you know, your 100% best on the platform. So what do you think's next on the horizon?
So right now, I'm currently signed up for the Shack Showdown Pro Meet, and that's in North Carolina, and it's the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Okay, so late November,
mid-late November, yeah. So that's the only definite for right now, but I'm going to try to take a different approach. I've talked with my coach about this, and we're going to just train as normal going through my off season. And if I start getting to a point where things are feeling good, my strength is good, everything's getting to be in a good point, then I'm going to, instead of picking a meet and prepping for that meet, if I start getting to be in a good point, I'll look around for a meet that's in the 5-ish week range from there, and then run a mini prep leading up to that meet and go do that one.
That's a really smart approach, honestly. I'd never considered that, because it's not like there's so many meets available these days. Like you can pick any weekend throughout the year and have a whole list of meets within driving distance of your location that you can compete at.
Especially being where we are. Yeah. We're within 2 to 3 hours of multiple major cities in Ohio. Yeah. And there's multiple meets every single weekend if you look at different federations just within that.
Well, even within USPC nowadays, I feel like you could pretty easily find a meet within driving distance if you did want to stay in federation. If they're
definitely the fastest growing federation over the last several years, and I mean, even with the para division, it just shows they're more innovative than a lot of these other federations. The rate that they've grown at and the quality of meet that they've run, I've competed with them at least 4 times, maybe 5 times. And every single one has been a good experience.
Yeah. And I think that's just a testament to how well they keep everything focused on the lifter and the lifter's experience.
Yes.
They're not trying to be in this to make millions of dollars. They're not trying to be in this to get tons of fame. They're just trying to make it about the lifter and give the lifter the biggest experience possible. And what's funny about that is when you make that your goal as opposed to the other things, that's what's going to get you the growth and the notoriety and all of that stuff that other people are exclusively chasing quicker than you would the other way around. So that's awesome, man. I love that approach. And I'm definitely excited for the Shack Showdown this year because I think Heather's going to jump back into that one.
Heather and Drake are both competing at that one, so
we've got a lot of monsters.
All three of us from the area going down to the same meet. It's going to be a good one.
I love that. We're definitely going to make it down for that this year, assuming nothing else crazy pops up in the meantime. And I'm excited to see what comes up next in the meantime.
Yeah. So, and we're going to have to try to get the three of us together for a lift or two leading up to it towards the end of prep, and try to get maybe some videos.
That'd be
made
awesome.
Of that.
We'd love to do some promo for that. That'd be really cool. Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Cool, man. All right. Well, thank you, sir, for coming on again. Always appreciate it. Always good talking to you. And guys, as we say with every episode, I know you got a lot out of this episode. The number one thing you can do for us is share this message that Tim has with somebody else that you know it will help, because there's so much good stuff packed into each of these episodes. We know that it has the potential to help anybody in your life, but send it to somebody who you think it could particularly meaningfully impact, because at the end of the day, that is the number one way how we move forward with our mission and our vision for everything we're doing at Impossible Performance. We love and appreciate all you guys, and we're so thankful that you've helped us grow this message into what it has become. And it's just an honor to be on this path. It's an honor to have you guys as part of our community. It's an honor especially to see the way that it's impacting your life. There's so many people and so many experiences we've had that we are just so thankful for, and it just blows our mind that like these instances happen in the way they do. We just had a couple big ones at the Arnold that we're excited to bring you some new guests and some of their missions and their mindsets and their messages, because we know, again, it's going to positively impact you guys as well as so many others you help share this with. So we really appreciate your efforts in those areas, because like I say, it's the number one way we move forward, because at Impossible Performance, we're striving to build a global culture of strength, fostering a spirit of growth in constant pursuit of the impossible. Thank you for listening, and as always, be impossible.